Living under the largest government in history, one that controls almost every aspect of our lives. Maybe, just maybe, it's a good idea to ask, are we actually free? Are we living in the land of the free? And what does that even mean? Or are we living under some kind of illusion of freedom? On this video, I'm going to pull back the curtain to reveal some probably uncomfortable truths for those of you who've never heard this kind of message, but I'm going to share plenty of insight on this from people like leading founders like Jefferson and Paine and Dickinson and others. And at the end of the show today, I've got some great advice on what needs to be done from Lysander Spooner that I think you're absolutely going to love, so make sure to stick around for that. But first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, August 26th, 2024. Let's get right to it, and I want to kick it off here with a new article we just published by John Whitehead over at the Rutherford Institute, and he puts it like this. For years now, the government has been playing a cat and mouse game with the American people, letting us enjoy just enough freedom to think we are free, but not enough to actually allow us to live as a free people. In other words, John writes, we're allowed to bask in the illusion of freedom while we're being stripped of the very rights intended to ensure that we can hold the government accountable to abiding by the rule of law, the Constitution for the United States. And he says, we're in trouble, folks. And I'm going to say he's absolutely right. We're in serious trouble. Now, Thomas Jefferson, of course, along with Richard Henry Lee and others, he put it like this. An elective despotism was not the government we fought for. Now, some people think, oh, you're free because you have a choice of who rules over you. But for the founding generation, especially for people like Jefferson, absolutely not. That was not the definition of freedom, just being able to choose people to wield power. Now, back to Whitehead. He said, freedom no longer means what it once did. This holds true whether you're talking about the right to criticize the government in word or deed, the right to be free from government surveillance, the right to not have your person or property subjected to warrantless searches by government agents, the right to due process, the right to be safe from militarized police invading your home, the right to be innocent until proven guilty, and every other right that once reinforced the founders' commitment to the American experiment in freedom. Of course, we have the right to keep in arms. The natural right of self-defense is certainly under constant attack as well from all sides. Now, here's how John Dickinson put it in his great Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania. This is letter number 11, I believe. These were written in 1767 in response to the hated Townshend Acts. And Dickinson became known as the penman of the American Revolution because of these documents. They were the most widely read on American liberty up until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense in 1776. And he points out, what happens when people allow this type of thing to go on? When they allow government to do things they're not authorized to do, well, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we shouldn't be surprised that, we live under the largest government in history. Here's how Dickinson put it. When an act injurious to freedom has been once done and the people bear it, the repetition of it is most likely to meet with submission. So as long as it's just done once and the people comply and they say, we'll just deal with it later, or maybe we'll try to convince the government later on to stop doing what the government was never supposed to be doing in the first place. And then when that doesn't work, the government learns that the people have already submitted. So why not push a little further and a little further and a little further? The founders, the old revolutionaries, certainly understood the danger of precedent. Years earlier, John Dickinson referred to the Stamp Act as an experiment of your disposition because he said if you comply with it, you establish the detestable precedent which those who have forged your fetters ardently wished for. I'm just thinking of that one off the top of my head. But anyways, here he is continuing that same kind of message in 1767. He said, for as the mischief of the one was found to be tolerable, they will hope that of the second will prove so too, and they will not regard the infamy of the last because they are stained with that of the first. So again, as long as the people continue to comply with stuff that the government isn't supposed to do, that's not telling the government that it needs to stop. When it does, or if it does once in a great while, then you're basically just in luck. Anyways, here back to John Whitehead. He said, on paper, we may be technically free. And I know people tell me this all the time. Whenever I talk about loss of freedom, they're like, well, dude, you're sitting here using your free speech and you're able to talk over this platform. Well, as long as they allow it is really what it gets down to. He said, in reality, this is how John puts it, we are only as free as a government official may allow. They have claimed power over us in virtually every aspect of our lives. Just because they don't wield it on something, well, of course that's good. We don't want them to wield the power against us. We don't want them to destroy the economy further, to violate our rights, to violate the Constitution 24/7, 365. But when they don't, of course, that's a good thing. But that's not the end of the story. If that's all we're looking for, then sooner or later, other people with power will come in and turn that around. Anyways, this is how John continues this. We only think we live in a constitutional republic governed by just laws created for our benefit. But again, in reality, we are only as free as a government official may allow. So in practice, anything that seems to be freedom, according to John Whitehead, and I agree with him on this, really is dependent on the benevolence of the people in power. We're just really on our knees begging for scraps. And Thomas Jefferson discussed this type of thing in his draft for the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 against the hated Alien and Sedition Acts, attacks on free speech, since we're talking about that as well. He said, resolved that the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government. Jefferson is pointing out he understood what was going on during the Declaration of Independence. He had a little insight into what was going on there. And so therefore, just a number of years later, just over a decade later, well, this is 2 decades now, but when they created the Constitution for the United States, they didn't create something, even though some people wanted it, Hamilton and others, for example. They wanted a system where they basically got rid of the states, where they eliminated them, and they were united only on a principle of total national power. But that's not what they came up with at the Philadelphia Convention. That's not what the people of the several states agreed to when they ratified the Constitution. And Jefferson's pointing out, like, the states, which includes this is not just about state governments. This is the people of the several states in their highest sovereign capacity, final authority, that is, as James Madison described it 2 years later as well. But he's saying, look, they're not coming together just to bend the knee to a new king in, New York City or Philadelphia or now Washington, D.C. He said instead, by a compact under the style and title of a Constitution for the United States and of amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for special purposes, delegated to that government certain definite powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right of their own self-government. Now, in that type of a situation, if the people of the several states combined together, united together, and delegated certain powers to a general government to act as their agent over certain very specific things, well, then who gets to make the decision if that government has violated the rules given to it? Does the government get to determine if it has done the right or wrong thing in and of itself? And that's how people treat it today. But Jefferson said that would be giving them unlimited power. He said the government, well, we'll get to that in a moment. But he doesn't say that specifically yet, but he does a little bit later. The government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself, since that would have made its discretion and not the Constitution the measure of its powers. So as long as the government gets to determine if the government violated the rules given to the government by the people of the several states, then the Constitution means nothing. It has no limits whatsoever. It's the government just determining what they can get away with. And later on in this, he says, if it's not up to each state to make this determination in their own state, if they think that the Constitution's been violated, then they are under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them. So it's really important to understand that so long as people rely on the government to keep itself in check, they've actually turned the entire system upside down. Instead of one where you have a general government exercising limited delegated powers as an agent of the sovereign people of the several states, you have it totally opposite. It is a sovereign central government with national power determining what it is going to do at all times. as Jefferson put it, that would be leaving our freedom to the discretion of government, and that's not the state of freedom. And John Whitehead put it like this: we're only as free as government officials may allow. Now, this should also be pretty obvious that this also includes waiting on the federal court. So if your only solution to problems with the federal government is to go to a lawsuit and say, well, let's get a federal court to tell another part of the federal government that the federal government should stop doing what the federal government was never authorized to do in the first place, you're still in that situation of unlimited submission because you're relying on part of the federal government to limit the federal government, and that is not what the founding generation considered a state of freedom. Now let's go back to John Dickinson. Again, this is really nothing more than a state of luck. And Dickinson, in those letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania, I've covered a number of times on the show. Here he is in letter number 7. He asks the essential question that I mentioned right at the beginning. What is freedom? Are we really free just because we can get away with doing some stuff without them trying to shut it down? We know that almost everything that we like to do, whether it's our natural right of self-defense or our free speech, privacy, drinking raw milk. I mean, so many different things that whether you like it or not, or want to exercise your right or not, we know that there are government people that want to stop you from doing that. And they claim the power to do so. And especially if there's another so-called emergency, they will shut everything down and shut down all of your freedoms. Like, that's what they do. They test it out. They see that an act injurious to freedom is complied with. And so then the next time they realize they can go a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. But here's how Dickinson put it. He said, "For who are a free people? Not those over whom government is reasonable and equitably exercised, but those who live under a government so constitutionally checked and controlled that proper provision is made against its being otherwise exercised." Again, when government has power to violate your rights and it chooses not to do so, it still is not a state of freedom, because the next people come in power and they claim that power and they use it against you. A free people are only those who live in a scenario where government is so checked and controlled that as soon as it tries to get out of line, it gets slapped right back into place. Quick slap back on everything that they do, whether it's through resistance or through the checks and balances of the system. But of course, the Federalists told us over and over and over that the only resource, this is how James Iredell, one of the first associate justices of the Supreme Court, put it. He said, the only resource against usurpation, that's an exercise of power not delegated to the government, the only resource is the inherent or natural right of the people to prevent its exercise, not the natural right of the people to ask government to stop doing what government shouldn't have done all along. St. George Tucker, in his view of the Constitution of the United States, had a very similar take in 1803. This is decades later, but the same type of perspective, we see it through the years. He said, "It is the due restraint and not the moderation of rulers that constitutes a state of liberty." So as long as, we know that government will always try to go beyond its limits, but if there's a scenario, whether they have unlimited power that they claim, but the people themselves stop them from exercising it all the time, the end result is they can't exercise that power. They are duly restrained from what they're trying to do. He said, again, let's go through this one again because I keep getting sidetracked. "It is the due restraint and not the moderation of rulers that constitutes a state of liberty, as the power to oppress, though never exercised, does a state of slavery." So I guess my analogy kind of sucked, because if you think about it, if they claim the power to oppress and the people resist them, you're still kind of in that, as Tucker put it, a state of slavery. So you have to actually completely limit their powers. And then on top of it, every time they go beyond it, you have to stop them rather than relying on them to stop themselves. Now, today, we live under the largest government in history. It's not even close. It's laughable how far off it is from what the founding generation described what we're supposed to have. James Madison in Federalist number 45 told us that the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government would be few and defined. Those are delegated, primarily Article 1, Section 8, but they're all throughout the document. There's around 30 to 35 powers that have been delegated to the federal government, depending on how you count them. Everything else, he said, would be reserved to the states and the people. This is a precursor to the 10th Amendment. And Mike Meharry puts it like this, describing the largest government in history. This is a blog post from a few years ago, because we've been talking about this for a long time, and some people are kind of shocked. What do you mean, largest government in history? We live in the land of the free. Nonsense. One metric, Mike writes, we can use to compare the relative size of governments is expenditures. Based on IMF data, the U.S. government spent $7.66 trillion in 2019. Pretty soon, that's going to seem like a fiscally responsible government, but it is clearly not. $7.66 trillion in 2019. The next closest country on that list was China, with outlays of $4.14 trillion. What is that? I went to government-run school, so my math is terrible without my phone. What is that, like 40%? So it's like they've 40% increase over the communist Chinese. And Mike says, obviously, China has a lot more people than the United States. So the disparity in the scope of government becomes even more apparent when you compare the two countries' per capita spending. The U.S. spent over 20 grand per person per capita in 2017, and China spent a paltry 2,700. Not 10 times, like 8. Like a massive increase. And no matter what justification people can give for this, salaries are high, whatever it may be, government is involved in way too much that it shouldn't be involved in the first place. And any suggestion that you get rid of anything is met with howls of people are going to be dying in the streets, whether it's the Department of Education or the Affordable Care Act or some of the nonsensical so-called national security agencies like DHS and NSA that gotta go. All this stuff should be just gone. Again, in other words, Mike says, the United States, the so-called limited constitutional republic, spends nearly 8 times per capita than China's, quote, socialist state under the People's Democratic Dictatorship. I think that's how it was listed in their constitution or whatever document they use. Now, here's Thomas Paine and the rights of man. So if we're looking at being the largest government in history, if that's not unlimited power, I don't think anything on earth ever has been. So take it for what it's worth. Here's how Paine put it in Rights of Man in 1792. It is not because a part of the government is elective that makes it less a despotism if the person so elected possess afterwards unlimited powers. And so my prediction, like I do every 4 years, whatever happens in November of this year, just like every other time, in 4 years, the government is going to be bigger, more powerful, more expensive, and have more violations of your liberty than it does today. It just happens constantly. And maybe once in a while you get a little dip, but it keeps going back up. And as long as people keep looking to the government to fix itself through changing the people in power and hoping that the people in power will not exercise the power that's handed to them on a silver platter, or looking to one branch of the central government to stop another branch of the central government, we shouldn't be surprised that things never, ever get better. Paine was right. It is not because a part of the government is elective that makes it less a despotism if the person so elected possess afterwards unlimited powers. And he puts it like this: election in this case becomes separated from representation, as the candidates are candidates for despotism. In case you're thinking, Bolden, where the heck can I find these quotes? Where can I find those stats from Mike Meharry's article? Where can I find John Whitehead's article? Well, we're going to have all those linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I should add, if you're finding some value in this information so far, if you find it interesting and educational, please consider subscribing and liking whatever platform you happen to be on. I'd be very grateful for your support in following us as closely as possible. We've got a lot of really interesting information that we try to share, reaching and teaching more people about the Constitution and liberty. But anyway, so a blog post. Alan Mosley organizes a blog post for every single episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, and I'll get it published a couple of hours after the live stream is done. There you're going to find, of course, the show links section on each blog post, which has all the stuff that I'm referencing in each episode over there. That way you can read and learn more in context on your own time. And there's also all the different platforms on. If we happen to be missing from one of your favorite platforms, you can let us know in a comment or by email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, all spelled out. Or if we happen to be missing one day from one that we've been on, we've been booted, then, well, you know where else you can find us. Anyways, we live stream on the mainstream ones like X and YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitch. We also live stream over at rumble.com and odyssey.com. Love everyone following us wherever you are. While I'm here, I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat over on Rumble. There's Brewster and Gringo and Dennis and maybe a few others. I'm just scrolling through as quickly as possible. Over on Facebook and YouTube, there's Ruben and Howard and Haji and Rights Are Not Tradition, Jug, Mark, and a number of other people. Again, I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. I can't be on. Wouldn't be honest if I've been mentally present for every single one since day one, but I do my best. Anyways, let's get back to it. So we're talking about the illusion of freedom that we're living under. Obviously, that's the thesis of what I'm talking about here. But John Whitehead takes it a little further. He said this didn't happen overnight. And just like every system, this doesn't happen overnight. He said this dissolution of that sacred covenant, I wish he would have used compact, but let's go with covenant, between the citizenry and the government, establishing we the people as the masters and the government as the servant, didn't happen overnight. In parlance from the founding generation, the people themselves are the source of all power. The people are superior. So as James Wilson described it, he said, constitutions are superior to our legislatures, our governments, but the people are superior to our constitutions. And he said that plural because he's referencing constitutions on a state and federal level. Of course, that was just the Articles of Confederation, but also the proposed Constitution for the United States. The people, this was a revolutionary principle. This was a big part of the conflict between the British and the colonies. The old revolutionaries took the position that sovereignty, final authority was in the people themselves, and when government went beyond certain limits, well, it was up to the people to put a stop to it. The British didn't like that, so you ended up with a war for independence after they started implementing a bunch of gun control. But that doesn't happen quickly. And again, this did not happen overnight. He said it didn't happen, this is John Whitehead again, it didn't happen because of one particular incident or one particular president. It is a process, one that began long ago and continues into the present day, aided and embedded by politicians and, of course, the horrible mainstream media, their corporate supporters, etc., by politicians who have mastered the polarizing art of how to divide and conquer. Now, James Otis Jr. made the same kind of observation back in 1767. Things don't go from land of the free to a total tyranny in one fell swoop. It is the work of years. He said a free government, maybe that's an oxymoron, but let's go with it. A free government never degenerated into tyranny all at once. It is the work of years. Again, recognizing that each precedent builds upon itself. Government never looks at what the previous people in power did as a ceiling. They look at it as a floor. Again, because if government people recognize that the population will submit, they'll bend a knee to one thing, well, let's push a little further and a little further and a little further. And I think it's ultimately very essential to understand who really is responsible when you get down to it. Responsible for the mess that we live in today. Again, the largest government in history, an ignorant population that knows absolutely nothing about the Constitution and liberty, has no appreciation for it. They live in fear constantly, so they're always begging for more government power. John Adams, when he was one of the good guys, of course, said, fear is the foundation of most governments. I would just remove the word most. But when a people are strong and free, that's not what they do. John Dickinson put it like this in Fabius number 4, arguing in favor of ratification of the Constitution. He said it must be granted. He was pointing out, like, look, we can, just no matter what we put on paper, you could end up with a bad administration. It doesn't guarantee a good one just because you come up with a good bunch of checks and balances. This is an important point that most people seem to miss. And Dickinson said, so it must be granted that a bad administration may take place. What is then to be done? And of course, this is again ties directly into what he said 2 decades earlier. This is 1788 versus 1767 when he asked, who are a free people? You're only free if as soon as government gets beyond its limits, it gets a quick slap back, pushed right back into the box. And he's saying almost the same thing here. It must be granted that a bad administration may take place. What is then to be done? The answer, he said, is instantly found before the supreme sovereignty of the people. When government is, well, all I've ever had is a bad administration. I don't know about you. Maybe your perspective is different than mine. But my line in the sand is following the Constitution. Even if I like the policy, I don't want them doing it if they're not authorized to do it, because it establishes a precedent for the next people to do it, and I'm not going to like them. And I've never really liked any of those people. But the answer to a bad administration is the supreme sovereignty of the people. And Dickinson said, it is their duty to watch and their right to take care that the Constitution be preserved, or in the Roman phrase, on perilous occasions, to provide that the Republic receive no damage. I've got news for you. Sitting around and complying with an NFA of 1934, now on the books for nearly a century, is not providing that the Republic receive no damage. It is guaranteeing that the Republic has received damage. That's just one example. I'm not just only talking about violations of our natural right of self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms in the Second Amendment. But if you think about something that's been on the books for decades and decades and has been complied with, that is not providing that the Republic receive no damage. Here's how Benjamin Franklin put it. He gave us a warning on what we call Constitution Day today. This is the last day of the Philadelphia Convention, September 17th, 1787. He recognized that, quote, this is likely to be well administered for a course of years and can only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other. So again, whether it was Dickinson or Benjamin Franklin, there are many others who had the same kind of message, saying if the government is not kept in check, it's the people who have failed to do the job, to get the job done, because it is not just their right, but their duty. And Franklin warned that this was going to happen. And Mike Meharry discussed it like this. He said, Franklin understood human nature. He suspected the government created by the Constitution would eventually fail, but not because of any specific structural defect that may exist in the document itself. He said the Constitution would be well administered over a course of years. So as long as there's good people in power, then they can do the right thing. But Patrick Henry, of course, as a quick aside, he warned us against relying on that type of a scenario. He said, if you have a good senator, if you have good senators, good representatives, and a good president, you have nothing to worry about. But can that be expected from human nature? And the answer, of course, if you want to pass the test, is no, not a chance. You cannot rely on it. And Benjamin Franklin understood this as well, even though he wasn't an anti-federalist like Patrick Henry, but he understood that over time, the people would just fall into corruption and comfort and ease and allow government to get away with stuff, and they would end up with despotic government. And Mike goes on, he says he predicted it would go off the rails once the people failed to do their job in keeping that government within its limits. At that point, it would be incapable of operating under anything other than despotism. And that's how John Whitehead really describes it. He said, through every fault of our own, it's we the people who are responsible for making sure that the government established by the people of the several states follows the rules. He says our apathy, our ignorance, our intolerance, our disinclination to do the hard work of holding government leaders accountable to the rule of law, our inclination to let politics supersede long-standing constitutional principles. We have been reduced to this sorry state in which we are little more than shackled inmates in a prison, being allowed some freedoms here and there, making it more and more difficult to exercise them over time, and then throwing out some emergencies here and there. And suddenly, even though there's no such thing as emergency powers listed in the Constitution, they claim they do that because people stay ignorant and fearful. And this is how John puts it. If we continue down this road, there can be no surprise about what awaits us at the end. He said, what's the answer? And I'm going to get to Lysander Spooner here in just a moment, especially for those of you who are waiting so kindly for the end or jumping forward for it. What's the answer? John puts it like this. For starters, stop tolerating corruption, graft, intolerance, greed, incompetence, ineptitude, militarism, lawlessness, ignorance, brutality, deceit, collusion, corpulence, bureaucracy, immorality, depravity, censorship, cruelty, violence, mediocrity, and tyranny. Okay, that's a pretty decent list. He said these are the hallmarks of an institution that is rotten through and through. Lysander Spooner probably summed it up best. Here at the very end, the very last paragraph of No Treason number 6, written in 1870. This is a great summary. He said, the lesson taught by all these facts is this. As long as mankind continue to pay national debts, so-called, that is, so long as they are such dupes and cowards as to pay for being cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, so long there will be enough to lend the money for those purposes. And with that money, a plenty of tools called soldiers can be hired to keep them in subjection. But, and this kind of gets into what John was saying as well, when they refuse any longer to pay for being thus cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, they will cease to have cheats and usurpers and robbers and murderers and blood money loanmongers for masters. Now, for many people, this kind of stuff is very uncomfortable reality. But it is the truth, and I think truth heals, and that's why we work so hard to reach and teach more and more people about these foundational principles, about the reality of what we live under today. There is no silver bullet that's going to turn it around in one cycle, one piece of legislation, one amendment, one nothing. It is going to take, as Samuel Adams put it, fortitude and perseverance. And nothing helps us more with that fortitude and perseverance, reaching and teaching people about the Constitution and liberty, more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way. We punch way above our weight class, and we work hard every single day to take a stand for the Constitution and liberty. We also have annual 5-year and lifetime options over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I'm going to take a quick look over in the live chat and see if there's any comments or questions. Oh, man, with lots of them. Founding fathers are weeping. Haji says, this is great as always, Chief. Thank you. I'll read through the comments a little bit later. I don't want to get too long into this episode, but I do appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed this information. I hope it at least made you think and learn something. That's more important than anything. I hope you had an awesome weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the path to liberty.